New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is comparative mysticism, and my guest, Professor Jorge Ferrer, has been teaching comparative mysticism at the California Institute for Integral Studies for the past 15 years, where he is the former chair of the Department of East-West Psychology. He is also author of Revisioning Transpersonal Theory, a participatory vision of human spirituality. He is also co-editor of an anthology called The Participatory Turn, Spirituality, Mysticism, and Religious Studies. And his most recent book, all of these published by the State University of New York Press, is Participation and the Mystery, Transpersonal Essays on Psychology, Education, and Religion. In addition, he has been an advisor to the United Nations non-governmental agency on religions for peace. Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you. And comparative religion, what a wonderful topic. Actually, comparative mysticism, that's even more interesting to me. And I know there's a big controversy in the field, although as you expressed it in a previous interview, the scholars seem to be united in this regard. Many people would say, nevertheless, that there is a common core to all mystical traditions, and that would be an inner, ineffable experience. But the scholars don't buy that.
Yes. Well, one of the problems is that whenever a practitioner or even some scholars, there are some scholars like from the so-called traditionalist school, like Fritz of Schuon and René Guénon, that they do defend that there's like some kind of perennial core in traditions, right? The primordial traditions we're talking the other day. And but one of the problems is that whenever any of these scholars or practitioners start speaking about what is that universal core, they start describing it in terms that privileges certain traditions over others. For example, it's like non-dual, it's ineffable, it's something that we cannot speak about, And other traditions, they understand the ultimate, the spiritual ultimates in different terms, So the perennial philosophy becomes kind of ideological in that sense, in the sense that it privileges certain traditions upon others. Despite their arguably noble attempt to create like this kind of like deeper mystical unity in the traditions. The thing for me as a student of mysticism is that there is something to it. It's like when you first come across religious traditions, what you see is tremendous diversity, right? It's tremendous, like and that's what they would call exoteric diversity, like the rituals, the dresses, the dances, the prayers, right?
Even
the sculptures,
within particular religions.
Even within particular religious traditions, exactly. Diversity is not only in between traditions, it's intra-traditions, right? In Buddhism, there's tremendous diversity. I mean, early Buddhism has very little to do with Dzogchen or Tibetan Buddhism, or Zen, right? So, but then, if you look deeper, and this is where these kind of perennialists go, you can sense like, well, beneath all that kind of exoteric diversity, there is something that unites people. There's like this mystical flavor, there's like this something ecumenical, something that really can bring hearts together, and I think that there is something beautiful in that impulse. It has been an impulse animating a lot of the interreligious dialogues, world parliaments of religion, and so forth, But, and this is the big but, when you look deeper into that kind of like supposedly mystical unity, what you realize is that there is tremendous diversity, not just in the exoteric, not just in the religious outside, but in the very mystical core of the traditions. The mystical worldviews, the mystical entities that people encounter, the mystical ultimates, it's very different when someone experiences, a personal God loving them moment to moment. One of the aims of Christian mysticism, through the ages, that, by the way, was not the union with God. It's more the presence of God in one's life. That's a much more prevalent goal in Christian mysticism, That's very different than experiencing the emptiness of Buddhism, the pratitya samutpada, the codependent origination in which nothing has like really intrinsic being and everything is interbeing with each other, and liberation is considered to really have like a direct grasping of that realization in many schools of Buddhism.
Yes.
Phenomenologically, textually, even the practitioners of those traditions, they would say these are different experiences, are different spiritual goals.
Well, I mean, for example, within the Hindu tradition, you have the Samkhya, or Samkhya, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, that philosophy versus Advaita Vedanta. They seem to be polar opposites right within Hinduism.
Exactly. That's exactly. Within a single tradition, you have tremendous diversity, and this is a great example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Sankhya Yoga, is originally, it has nothing really much to do with the ways yoga is practiced and cultivated in the West today, that I think is actually cultivated in a more integrative ways than in original times. In original times, Samkhya Yoga was about the isolation of the witness, pure consciousness, from any object, including material and mental objects. So it wasn't nothing to do with Cartesian mind matter, something else. It's like just the witness, Purusha, is dissociated, separated from anything else, and that's salvation. That's Kaivalyam, Kaivalyam is salvation because it's the intermingling of the Purusha in Prakriti, in the material and natural world, the world of the objects, is considered the cause of suffering.
Yes.
Right? So that's very different than in Advaita Vedanta, as you pointed out, like in which the realization that Atman is Brahman, right?
Right.
Atman is Brahman, and Brahman includes everything.
And that would be considered a heresy in other traditions.
Exactly.
In fact, I mean, in Judaism, for example, they're very clear. You don't become God. God is God. Humans are humans.
Exactly. Exactly.
The idea, I mean, in Judaism, for example, the greatest prophet is considered Moses. And Moses, at the very end of his life, attained a vision. He saw the face of God. But at that point, he died. Because no one can see the face of God and live.
That's right.
In the Jewish tradition, whereas in other traditions you become God.
Exactly. So, that's considered in some traditions an heresy, right?
Yeah.
Or like it's called a spiritual titanism, the attribution of divine powers to oneself.
But it seems to me in every culture, mystics have run the risk of being called heretics.
I would qualify. I would offer a qualification in the sense that, most popular mystics from Meister Eckhart, and the Buddha himself, they became famous precisely because they were very heretics. They went against the scripture. They went against the establishment, But if you look at the history of mysticism and mystics across the years, again, the different traditions, you realize a different picture, Most mystics actually were not in the business business of kind of being heretics or contradicting the scripture. They were in the business of enacting and cultivating and living experientially the teachings of the tradition. So this vision of like the mystic as an heretic, as a rebel, there is some truth to that, but has been exaggerated in huge ways that does not withstand historical evidence.
Well, if you take any tradition and push it to its extreme, and on the one hand you're fulfilling the ideals of the tradition, on the other hand you're going against the power structure.
Well, that's I believe so. I believe so. But depending on, within a single tradition, there is always like I would say there is like two strands that get very intermingled. And a strand of inquiry, spiritual inquiry, and a strand of spiritual indoctrination. And those two are very complexly weaved in the tradition. Actually, most of what we understand in the West, in the modern West, by spiritual inquiry has been kind of like affected by modern standards of open-ended inquiry, like in science, for example, in philosophy, that they do not have too much room in the religious traditions. To inquire in a religious tradition spiritually is to really finally access the truths of the founder or the truths of the scripture, So in a way, this idea of open-ended inquiry, of course, is emerging today in contemporary kind of like versions of the traditions and more radical schools, But historically, that was not really the case, It was more about, you sit in meditation to corroborate, enact and corroborate the truths of the Buddha or the truths that were revealed in the Torah or in the Vedas and so forth.
Well, as I recall, the Buddha himself said to his disciples at one time, "Don't believe anything I say. Just, test it out for yourself. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't work, don't."
Yes, that's a great statement of the Buddha. And as usually happens, when founders die, things get more systematized almost immediately. It also happened with Sri Aurobindo. Very similar statements he would offer to his community, right? I don't want the integral yoga to become a religion, right? And what happened as soon as he died? You visit the ashram and there's different camps discussing what he said and what he didn't say, and there's pictures of him everywhere. If he would come alive, he would say, "You are just doing exactly what I asked you not to do."
And I recall, now that I think about it, when I was a young man, I was in England and had the opportunity to attend a session with Jaddu Krishnamurti.
Oh, excellent.
And who's famous for saying, "Don't have gurus." I don't want to be a guru. But then everybody is treating him like a guru. They're kissing his feet, and no other guru got treated any better than Krishnamurti.
Maybe Osho.
But even in his lifetime, it's as if people are in some way, they're so eager to have a guru to whom they could be devoted. And I suppose for some people, the guru who says, "Don't follow gurus,"
it's more attractive.
But it's quite paradoxical.
Totally. There is a great movie by Luis Buñuel, the famous Mexican surrealist, called Simeon of the Desert, in which there is this guy, poor guy, who goes into this mountain there and hangs out there, and then the whole village suddenly they start treating him as a saint, and then they build a whole church around him, and the guy doesn't say a word during the whole movie, So the whole movie advances with all this crazy stuff happening around him. And at some point, the guy comes down and says, "Goodbye." And asks him, "Are you leaving us? You're saying?" He's like, "No, I was just hanging out there. I don't know what was happening down here, but it was very interesting. Thank you."
Well, I know of other similar movies as well in the Western context where people who are really fools can be taken for greatly enlightened beings. Which reminds me of an interesting episode in the history of mysticism. When I was younger, I took an interest in Mayor Baba, who was regarded by his followers as an avatar.
Yes.
And he I actually liked one thing that he did in particular. He would work with people who were called the mad musts, the God intoxicated, that they were so deeply involved in the mystical experience of union with or communion with God that they couldn't function. That they were like hospitalized. They were, people might have thought of them as deeply psychotic, but Meher Baba would come and he'd sit and meditate with them, and apparently telepathically he would help them work through this, that he regarded them as very highly evolved spiritually.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. In my sense, my frank sense is that, the guru model that in a way like has been exported from India, to the West, although of course we had our own versions of that, in Sufism, the rabbinic culture and so forth,
Yes.
It's a model that I think is still functional for quite a number of people, but I see as a model with many intrinsic problems that creates consistently a lot of dysfunctional family dynamics, a lot of like really projection and transference of a single person. There's always a lot of troubles around these communities, That's not to say that many people have healed deeply and grow deeply in contact with gurus. And of course, if you add to that what we were discussing the other day, that many of these gurus and even genuinely awakened people in their consciousness sometimes are underdeveloped or even wounded at sexual and emotional interpersonal levels. Things get really messy, My frank sense is that more and more people today they will kind of be in contact with perhaps people like them, but not as gurus, but as reference, we'll have like different references, spiritual mentors and friends and communities, and the growth is going to be more horizontal and also guided from within versus like a external structure with a guru that ultimately has the last authority about your spiritual life and tell you what to do. And this is how they roll normally.
Yeah. Well, and the tradition of gurus in India is very strong. I mean, there are those people who follow gurus who would tell me and have told me that's the only way. If you don't have a guru, in fact, a living guru, not a dead one. I know Da Frijan once wrote an essay called "Dead Gurus Don't Kick Ass."
I remember.
and his vision was a guru has to really provoke people to get them out of the chains of conventional conditioning.
There is room for that, and I can see the value of that, and like has never been my cup of tea, like that kind of confrontational approach. I've grown much more with mentors and people that show a lot of unconditional love and support, and at the same time they would call me on things with love when they would see kind of going out of integrity.
Yeah.
But this kind of more crazy wisdom traditions or confrontational traditions. But again, I'm very supportive of diversity, as you know. So it's like, well, if this is what's working for you in this moment, it's really paying spiritual fruit cash. By all means, and I would say that I don't want to reduce psychoanalytically things because that's not my worldview. But I do know that many people working with gurus, at the same time, it's complex. They're working spiritually, they're also working psychologically in many things, transference with parental authority and things are complex, and it could be a wonderful model of healing or could be a wonderful model of re-traumatizing depending on the guru. But coming back to the idea of comparative mysticism in connection to the teachers, one of the things that for me struck me and I think has a practical relevance is that, I remember, for example, if you are working, let's say, in a Buddhist meditation retreat, right? And you're practicing, and then you go to talk to your teacher, let's say a Zen teacher, and then you tell him that you had an experience of God. Or experience of Atman Brahman, an experience that their tradition considers actually delusion.
Yes.
The teacher is going to tell you, go back to your Safu and continue meditating because what you experience is total delusion. But those very insights are what they are considered to be highest insights in other traditions, you know. So this is where comparative mysticism and the guru system and the spiritual growth of individuals get intermingled and get tricky.
Yeah. Now, you, as I understand your perspective, you would say that every human situation offers the possibility of spiritual growth and even mystical enlightenment.
Yes.
Every human situation, people who have, in other words, no concept of mysticism whatsoever, let's say they're working in a woodworking shop somewhere, that has just as much potential for spiritual, mystical realization as being in an ashram.
I think so. I think so. And I think there's many historical cases and modern cases of people who had powerful awakenings in, being businessmen or like in a shop. So this is happening. And there's some great studies by Steve Taylor these days about like doing studies on, unaffiliated mystics, people who were not in any tradition and they had awakenings, So there's some empirical evidence for that, But my point is more is about this emphasis of the participatory, emphasis on the relational, that we can grow spiritually in whatever path life and spirit call us to be, So for many it would be like in the meditation room, but for others it's going to be like, like taking like intimate relationship as a spiritual path,
Yep.
Many people are doing that. Tremendous growth can emerge from there, For others will be conscious parenting, and I think that there is tremendous growth if those pathways also engage in a context of spiritual aspiration, then even with more chances. The chances that awakening can happen spontaneously, they're always there, but they're small. It was Richard Baker-Roshi, say, lightning is an accident, right? Something like that. But if you have a context of spiritual aspiration for whatever you do, and then you bring to you the qualities of mindfulness, of inquiry, of curiosity, of generosity of the heart, and that can be applied everywhere.
And so you seem to be emphasizing the notion of community here, that the community is very important in terms of mutual support.
Yes.
And yet we have, communities also cut both ways. You have what they call the madness and delusion of crowds.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think like my sense is that the community is for support, but also for check and balances, right? As we were talking the other day, it's the community what's going to tell you, well, Jorge, you think you are growing beyond your narcissism, but actually we believe you're a little deluded because this is how you act. There's a disparity between what you say and your actions, or how we feel you energetically, right? But on the other hand, you're right. There is dangers in community, especially the dangers in community emerges. I think what we could see historically and in the examples I've seen around, when communities isolate themselves and they get inflated, especially with charismatic gurus, that they inflate their communities like we're unique, we are the most, only us will be saved. These are some of the other messages. The messianic tendencies, and then many people, unfortunately, can get very, very deluded with those, especially if it's a guru that has like some Shakti powers and can provide certain spiritual experiences. That, together with those ideologies, many people can get really hooked and could be very dangerous.
Let me ask you this question. We're talking about comparative mysticism.
Yes.
Where do you draw the line between mysticism and comparative mysticism and religion?
Yes.
Just plain religion.
Sure. The line has been drawn in different ways. I think different scholars would draw the line in different ways, but basically one of the main distinctions from the literature, quite accepted, is that mysticism has to do with something about the direct apprehension of spiritual truths or direct access to spiritual entities or ultimates. So not mediated by doctrine, not mediated by anything, while religion is kind of like the more social elaboration of the doctrines and rituals. In a way, religion is more communal, more social. Mysticism is more individual. And religion is saying to be also more cognitive, more belief-based, while mysticism is said to be more affective, experiential. All that can be very cognitive as well. Yeah. So I'm making these distinctions with a grain of salt here. Right? You see me?
Yes. Because there's some overlap.
There is a lot of overlap, but the idea of direct access, that's one of the things. Like the idea that I'm having a direct experience of that truth. It's not something that I'm just learning about it through my mind. I'm just living it. I'm just experiencing it directly.
Well, for example, there was a big conflict in the early years of Christianity between the Orthodox religion, the Catholic religion of the time, and the Gnostics.
Yes.
And Gnosticism, when I first studied Gnosticism, I thought, well, it's all about gnosis, or that direct realization. But lately I've done some interviews with people about Gnosticism, and they explained to me, no, there's actually a pretty distinct theology associated with Gnosticism.
Absolutely. And again, like this idea of mysticism free of doctrine, it's unusual and rare. We could have seen that in a few particular cases of like spontaneous awakenings of people that reportedly didn't have much knowledge of religion, But in general, historically, I mean, many of the greatest mystics, they were great scholastics. Like Meister Eckhart, most of the Dalai Lamas, I mean, Tibetan monks, I mean, they're great students. So sometimes in the New Age movement and in contemporary modern spirituality, there is like this sense like, oh no, studying the doctrines, the scriptures, that's just for religious people, I want to be a mystic, I just want to go into the forest and have a blast. But they don't understand that a lot of the refined states of consciousness that those people would go, they were normally based on years of study and meticulous study and deep understanding of the nuances of consciousness, and that understanding helped them to achieve those states. And this is something that, contemporary New Age movement probably don't like too much because they don't like too much to study.
Well, I'm under the impression when it comes to mysticism that there are different types of mysticism for different personalities.
Yes.
Not everybody is cut out to be an intellectual.
Exactly.
Some people have a very, very profound and powerful heart experience.
Exactly.
And so they pursue, in yoga it would be called bhakti yoga. That for other people it's about service in the world. So there are many approaches.
Exactly. And in the same way that in India, they never made a hierarchy between these positions. Bhakti, Raja, wasn't better than the others for different people. I extend that also to other types of mysticism, like non-dual, theistic, nature mysticism, psychic mysticism, because most religious traditions, and here we go back to this conflict of hierarchies, they try to arrange all these types of mysticism according to how they close or far they are from their idealized state, written in their own scriptures, and they create those hierarchies, So in that regard, like what I'm saying is like, well, why is that so, Why cannot some people practice non-dual or theistic and nature mysticism, and that can be considered on equal basis if they are growing up spiritually?
Well, I mean, you refer to spiritual narcissism.
Yes.
The tendency for people to try to elevate whatever approach they're engaged in.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's just not human nature.
I wonder that too, in particular, when you see, I wrote about this in my last book, right? You would consider the example of the Dalai Lama, contemporary Dalai Lama, in which I have not met him in person, but I have friends that I have. And I've heard many things about him. From all I know, is one of the he would score very low in the narcissistic personality inventory. He's probably one of the persons who would score lower, a paragon of humility and open-heartedness, and at the same time, he's completely convinced, firmly convinced that the truth of emptiness of his own school, Gelukpa school, that is different from other Tibetan schools, different from other schools of Buddhism.
There are 4 Tibetan schools, I believe. Yeah.
And within the Tibetan school, well, there's even more. There's even more than 4. There's 8 or 9 now. So he's very clear. He says, practitioners from other Buddhist schools, even Tibetan, they don't really understand emptiness, and therefore they cannot fully achieve final liberation. And when he's asked, what about people from other traditions and religious traditions? Because he's known to be a spiritual pluralist. He has said, it's good to have different religions because people have different dispositions, psychological dispositions. But when you go to the interviews, especially interviews he gives in Tibetan, and they're translated, and he's very clear. It's he believes that people, after different lifetimes, they will all recognize the highest truth of emptiness of his school. So if someone like him, if someone like the Dalai Lama, who are a paragon of selflessness and openness, falls into that attitude that I call spiritual narcissism, I think it's something that runs very deeply in the collective unconscious, and probably also has something to do with ethnocentric tendencies, competitive tendencies between religious traditions. In Buddhism, the debates, the debates between...
Well, it might have something to do with our primate ancestry. If you look at chimpanzees and gorillas, they form bands and they compete with each other.
Yes.
So there's a certain amount of competition going on. And yet, at the same time, my sense is this, that, and I've talked to many people about this, that the mystics of every tradition, whether they're Native American or Hindu or Jewish or Christian or Muslim, feel closer to each other than they feel toward the pious, conventional, orthodox of conservatives of their own tradition.
Yes, I totally agree, and I have been also in the midst of some of those encounters, intermonastic encounters, hanging out with monks, and there is that beauty. There's Christian and Buddhist monks, they speak about they have this shared sense of communion and goodness of the heart, the purity of the heart that is cultivated. So there's a lot of qualities, human qualities that I think they find a lot of common ground. But when they start speaking about doctrine, about their beliefs about the spiritual ultimates, they themselves, even the monks and the mystics, they would say, well, I don't think we're talking about the same thing. But the thing is this has been all normally taken as a negative, as a problem. And what I'm saying is this is not a problem. This is great. This is speaking about the great creativity of the mystery of life, of the generative force behind Big Bang or behind the emergence of life, whatever you want to call it, in the kind of a co-creative kind of unfolding of spiritual creativity through human participatory individuals. So as you know, the way many of these kind of universalist, perennialist images that we're giving are this, paths going to the same peak of the mountain, or there is one elephant, right? That different blind men touch different parts of the elephant, and they say these are the different religious traditions. And the image I bring is a more organic one that I think is more connected to evolution as we see it, is the image of a tree, right? A tree in which the different traditions would be branching out in different directions, and that doesn't mean that there's no overlaps. Like branches in a tree, there could be many overlaps between them, but there are different soteriological projects, and this is good news.
Well, you point out, using that metaphor, that they have a common root.
Yes.
And the other point I think you've made, though, is when using the metaphor of the blind men and the elephant, very well-known tale, what you're saying is there is no elephant.
Correct.
But there is a root.
Yes, that's how, my project has been like aim at minimizing spiritual narcissism, at minimizing this competitiveness between religious traditions, and as fostering a more harmonious way in which different traditions and people from different beliefs can interact with each other. So all of we can offer as human beings are constructions and concepts, images that have like a practical utility. Yeah. So this is an image for me that, I also make the analogy of members of a single family, right? I'm sure all the viewers, many of the viewers will have families, So as members of a single family, we will have the same root, the genealogical tree that we come from,
Yeah.
But, if you are healthy parents and you have children, you want to support the individuation of your children, that you want them to be who they really are, right? If they want to be a lawyer, if they want to be like a journalist.
Some parents,
yes. From a psychological, modern psychological perspective would be the healthiest approach versus like trying to control the future of your kids.
Well, that would be my perspective.
I know.
But people say, oh, you're very liberal.
Sure.
Other people say, no, parents have the right and the authority to control their children very strictly.
I very strongly disagree with that opinion. Yeah. I'll tell you why. Because your children are not your possession. The children came through you in freedom, and to make them a possession, I think is a different relationship with children that I wonder is the
well,
right.
If you grew up, let's say, in an Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox Jewish family, and you have children,
yes.
they are going to be deep. I have cousins, for example, who are not even ultra, modern Orthodox Jews, and they had a large family, which is typical, and every one of the children has followed and has joined that tradition, and I'm sure that the parents wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
I understand, and I understand this is one example of many other cultures and places in which this takes place, and I think that's still probably like a temporary thing that will go for years, perhaps generations, but I'm convinced that certain values that modernity came forth of individuation, and the freedom of each human being to follow their path and follow their inner call, they will triumph even on those traditions. And you can see that in India, you can see that in many places, in which and of course, this has two different readings, One reading is like, Western values are colonizing again our land,
Yes.
By the Orthodox. But an increasing number of people, like in India, they're embracing modern values because of the suffering. The organizations of women that are emerging grassroots in India, to start fighting hugely horrible patriarchal actions in India. It's tremendous. So they're starting to organize themselves and all these kinds of values. I think this is unstoppable. It's unstoppable, but I may be wrong.
Well, what you seem to be pointing toward is a tendency for the human species on this planet to become more globalized, and as a result of that, to become more liberal in their outlook, because being exposed to other cultures does that. People.
It's happening.
It's happening, but I notice that there's a resistance. There's a backlash. People who feel that this is a very dark and dangerous move, and that traditional values are being threatened.
If you look at history, in any kind of important change of paradigmatic cultures, and they were always the two camps, right? It's the same with scientific revolutions, There's always the camp of concern. No, let's stick to the old paradigm. These ideas is too crazy, and normally it takes generational changes. How many decades of internet and we have had? The World Wide Web was invented when? In 1980?
I think even the very early years, actually, now I know about it because my friend Jacques Vallée was working with the DARPA when they were developing the DARPANet, which became the internet back, so it started in the 1970s.
Exactly. But it came more more in the 80s. And that's very few decades. That's in the history of human beings, in the history of human cultural exchanges, that's nothing. And look what it has done. in a few decades, for the good and the bad, but it's tremendous.
And yes, change is accelerating everywhere.
Tremendously.
And yet the idea of mysticism is to find the truths, the unchanging truths, the things that stay the same no matter what superficial changes occur.
Yeah, but that's also a classical account of mysticism, you know.
It is.
Yes, in which I think like many modern mystics and many people who study also the history of mysticism, you know, you realize that historically wasn't the case, you know. For example, not only the idea, but the lived experience of emptiness in the Buddhist traditions from Theravada to Mahayana to Tibetan to all the different to Zen changed radically. So not only the notion, but the lived experience of awakening went through an evolution in a single tradition, you know. And I think the same you could say in Christianity had been many different goals emerging, you know. The presence of God, you know, imitation of Christ, and many metanoia, many different goals emerging in different places, you know. So I celebrate all that spiritual cornucopia of creativity, and I think it's a good thing. But for many people, when there is this tremendous diversity and plurality of goals, they get more anxious. It's like, wow, so that means that the truth I believe is just one more.
People want to cling to something, truth with a capital T. It seems very important for some people to have that as sort of the bedrock of their lives.
Yes.
And what you seem to be saying is it doesn't exist.
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying that nothing exists. That could be. I'm thinking
maybe I'm going too far.
I think because for me, I mean, there is a cosmos. There is a generative, creative energy in the cosmos. What they call the mystery, right?
You use the term, the mystery. It's in your book, Participation and the Mystery.
Yes. But yes, exactly. But I take pains so that term mystery cannot be reified or put at a super ultimate that can be put over others, you know? Yeah. So that's where my project is. It's like this kind of undetermined creative energy, you know, with which traditions and human beings, we co-create, you know, different spiritual pathways, you know, and then like the different branches of different trees, they can go also to different spiritual ends that are always in evolution as well, because that energy is always in evolution. So that's how I'm holding that piece.
Well, so it sounds like you're saying, from your point of view, there is a kind of a bedrock. It's evolutionary creativity.
Yes. You know, for me, it's like I try to be as minimalist as possible with my metaphysics, you know, but it's impossible to do without metaphysics, you know, in a way. So basically for me, three things that are, for me, unquestionable, and perhaps you or others can question them, is that there is something. Not nothing. We are here. Yes. It's a cosmos. There is something going on, right?
Yes.
And this something is in movement, is in change. You know, we can track a history, the Big Bang of the cosmos, the planet Earth, the emergence of life. There's we call it evolution, we call it change, we call it creative and advancing. There's an unfolding of something, and there are many questions around all that, right?
Something is unfolding.
Something is unfolding, right? And the third one is like, we are part of that something that is unfolding.
Yes.
We participate in that creativity of the cosmos, right, as human, because we are not separated from it. We are, you know, as Carl Sagan would say, and others, cosmologists, were part of the cosmos that became conscious of itself. Right?
We are an expression of the creativity of the cosmos.
Yeah, and we are the organs for self-revelation of nature and the cosmos, you know, and there may be others, you know, there's extraterrestrial planets, but as far as we know here, we're one of the most powerful organs on the planet, you know. Other species, they may have windows into different aspects of existence that we don't, and that what makes them so special as well. But we have quite a lot, and I don't think that the other species have mapped the Big Bang, for example.
So, In effect, it seems as if from this conversation I would take the notion that there are many people who are authentic mystics who are never labeled as such.
I think so.
science fiction writers, for example. Many of them have a deep mystical bent.
Yes, I would even add that mystics abound in academia, There is many people in the fields of psychology, of religious studies, that they are kind of in the closet. They're mystics in the closet. And only in the last 10 years, they're starting to speak about their experiences, more and more, because as we discussed, like the people in positions of power in academia, they went through the countercultural movement now. It's the people who took LSD and did transcendental meditation. So there's a different climate for that. Before, you were going to teach religion, you had to teach religion in a very neutral, objective way, historical, But today, like, for example, my friends at, Rice University, in the Department of Religious Studies, all of them are mystics scholars.
Well, that reminds me of an incident in my own past. Now that I think about it, that points to exactly this, because there was a time when I was getting my doctoral degree in parapsychology. In fact, had already earned my degree when the skeptics, the deniers, put enormous pressure on the university to revoke my degree, because and the dean was about to do it. The graduate division, he said, major universities do not give degrees in parapsychology. So you thought you got a degree, but actually you didn't.
Oh my God!
I went through a big crisis at that point. I thought I had earned a degree, and they were ready to take it away from me. So I appealed to the provost of the university. Now, it turned out that this provost, his name was Rod Parks, he's now deceased. But I later learned about him that he had done something in his early life quite amazing. He had rowed a boat, sailed, I think it was a small sailboat. He sailed a boat across the Pacific solo. And surely that is the sort of occasion that would generate mystical experiences. And here he is, provost, very high administrator in the university. I suspect that experience probably saved my doctoral degree. In a way, now that I think about it.
That's excellent. That also reminds me, when I was a student at the University of Barcelona, and I was already interested in transpersonal psychology and meditation and self-consciousness, and I wanted to do my PhD studies, but at that time Barcelona was completely cognitivist and neuroscientific, But finally, I talked with the director of the Department of Neuroscience and Psychology, and I told him, like, listen, I would love to do like a PhD project on the electrophysiology of Zen meditation, and I told him this could be very exciting and valuable, and he went for it. He went for it, and but later he told me that the reason he went for it is because he himself, back in the 60s, had practiced transcendental meditation, and he knew there was something to that. And so this is this is why I feel optimistic, in some ways. There is tremendous resistance to change. There is tremendous forces, but there is a generational change as well that I think that it's going to bring, I hope, more good things than bad.
So in effect, by teaching comparative mysticism, as you have done for the last 15 years, we're helping to engender a new generation of people who will, minimally speaking, be very open-minded about the possibilities.
Yes, and that's what I've been told by students even years later, that those classes they took for me, they help them not only just in their professional scholarly work, but they help them to be with others with different mindsets in a different way. And especially today in America, it is a lot of friction with different mindsets.
Well, Jorge Ferrer, I commend you. I think you're doing very important work in the world, opening people up to appreciating the possibilities of authentic mysticism with the spiritual narcissism being minimized.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.